Washington, D.C., 6:17 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the kind of morning where nothing feels wrong, coffee shops opening their doors, metro trains running on schedule, markets in Tokyo closing green, everything on the surface functioning exactly as it should. Then a reporter asks a simple question, not about trade, not about the economy, about time. Specifically, how much time is the President of the United States willing to spend on a war that was supposed to be over in 4 days? 3 words come back, don't rush me. And just like that, the temperature in the room, in every capital city on Earth, drops several degrees. Because here's what those 3 words actually mean once you strip away the bravado and read the subtext underneath. They mean the 4-day promise is dead. The 4 to 6 week timeline is dead. The mission accomplished exit ramp that America's allies were quietly counting on, dead. What we may be looking at instead, if the strategic logic currently being floated inside Washington holds, is something that rhymes with a word nobody in power wants to say out loud. Vietnam, not as a warning, not as a cautionary tale dusted off from the history books, but as a model, as a reference point for acceptable duration. Think about what that means for the global economy, for the Strait of Hormuz, for every nation on Earth whose energy supply runs through that narrow corridor of water. This is where the story actually begins, and most of the world has no idea what is coming. Before we go any further, Aikar, here is exactly what you are going to get in the next 20 minutes. We are going to break this down into 4 layers. Layer 1, why don't rush me, is the single most dangerous signal to come out of Washington this week, and what it reveals about the strategic thinking, or lack thereof, driving this conflict. Layer 2, the economic mechanism that is quietly turning the Hormuz blockade into a weapon that cuts both ways, and why the people ordering it may not fully understand what they have set in motion. Layer 3, how Iran is fighting back without firing a single additional missile, and why that particular form of warfare is almost impossible to counter. Layer 4, 3 concrete scenarios for where this ends. One of them should genuinely concern every person watching this. Everything is moving fast right now. If you want to read this board before it flips, subscribe, because we are not slowing down. Let us start with the plan, because there was a plan. The original architecture of this conflict, as best as can be reconstructed from what is leaked out of Washington, rested on 3 assumptions. 3 beliefs so deeply held that apparently very little serious contingency planning was done beyond them. Assumption 1, take out the leadership. The thinking, as it appears to have been sold internally, was almost elegant in its simplicity. Remove the Ayatollah, remove enough of the senior command structure, and the whole apparatus, 46 years of institutional architecture, revolutionary ideology baked into an entire generation, a parallel military structure with its own budget and its own chain of command, collapses like a building when you pull the central column. This is not strategic analysis. This is a cartoon. And here's the part that should genuinely disturb you. America once had policymakers who understood Iran with real complexity and nuance. They may have sold a simplified version to the public, but they knew better privately. What we appear to be dealing with now is a leadership that bought the cartoon, that internalized the oversimplification as actual doctrine. The people ordering this war may genuinely believe that governments fall when you kill their leaders, as if removing any single node from a constitutional system with established succession protocols simply ends the game. Assumption 2, economic strangulation works fast. This is the J.D. Vance theory, reportedly expressed to colleagues after the failed talks in Pakistan. Apply the blockade, squeeze the oil revenue. Iran comes back to the table, quote, in no time, stop. Iran has lived under coordinated international sanctions for decades. This is not a new pressure they are encountering for the first time and scrambling to absorb. This is Tuesday for them. Their population has been psychologically and economically conditioned to endure exactly this kind of external punishment. The pain threshold is not comparable to what an American administration facing midterm electoral pressure can withstand. The calculation is not even close. Assumption 3, the blockade is total and the control is absolute. Trump stated publicly with full confidence that he personally kept the strait closed, that they have, quote, total control. CBS News, which is not exactly a hostile outlet to this administration, estimated Iranian naval capacity at roughly 60% of pre-conflict levels. The small boat asymmetric fleet, what Trump casually dismissed as wise guy ships, was specifically engineered over many years for exactly this scenario: harassment operations, choke point disruption, making the implementation of a naval blockade operationally painful and logistically exhausting for a force that was not designed to fight this particular kind of war. None of the three assumptions held. And yet the language coming from the podium, from Truth Social, from the Secretary of Defense, continues to perform a confidence that the underlying facts do not support. That gap between the performance and the reality is precisely where the danger lives. Because when the assumptions are wrong and the plan dissolves, one of two things happens. You adapt, or you escalate to avoid admitting you were wrong. Watch which one this administration chooses. Now we get to the part that mainstream media is not explaining clearly enough, because the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is not simply a military story. It is not even primarily a military story. It is a systems story. And once you understand the systems it is disrupting, you begin to understand why Iran may not need to win a single naval engagement to ultimately come out of this in a stronger position than Washington currently anticipates. Three announcements. Pay attention to all three. Announcement number one: the choke point does not care about your press release. Pete Hegseth stood in front of a microphone and told the world that this blockade is essentially Europe's problem, that America gets its energy domestically, that the Strait of Hormuz is not America's concern in the way people think. He even suggested, with apparent seriousness, that European nations should put down their baguettes and pick up a bazooka. Here is what that statement deliberately obscures. Global energy markets are not a series of isolated national pipelines. They are a single, interconnected pricing system. When supply contracts anywhere in that system, prices spike everywhere, simultaneously, without waiting for a political press conference to give them permission. Beyond that, the industrial infrastructure of refining is not interchangeable. Refineries across Asia and parts of Europe were engineered specifically to process heavy, high-sulfur crude, the precise grade that flows predominantly out of the Persian Gulf. You cannot simply redirect a supertanker to Texas and solve the problem. The chemistry does not work that way. The retooling would take months. The capital expenditure would be catastrophic, and the market would not wait. Lufthansa has already canceled 20,000 flights. Bangladesh's central bank has publicly disclosed that it is running critically low on foreign exchange reserves. These are not peripheral anecdotes. These are the first visible stress fractures in a system that was not designed to absorb a sustained Hormuz disruption. The cascading systemic collapse does not announce itself. It begins quietly at the edges in places that financial television does not cover until the contagion is already spreading toward the center. Announcement number two. Iran's most powerful weapon is a calendar. This is the mechanism that Washington appears most dangerously unwilling to reckon with. Every single day, this conflict continues without resolution. The internal political mathematics inside the United States deteriorates. Fuel costs rise. Supply chain disruptions translate into consumer price inflation. Industries that depend on stable energy pricing begin making defensive decisions, cutting investment, deferring expansion, laying off workers. The economic pain moves from the abstract to the personal, and personal economic pain has a direct and historically documented relationship with political approval ratings. Iran does not need to sink an American aircraft carrier. Iran needs to not lose for long enough. This is precisely the asymmetric logic that ended American involvement in Vietnam. Not a military defeat in the conventional sense. A slow, grinding erosion of domestic political will. A public that eventually concluded the cost was not proportional to any achievable objective. A Congress that stopped funding the mission. The Iranian strategic calculus, as best as can be assessed from public statements and negotiating positions, appears to rest on exactly this foundation. Every week of economic blockade that they survive is a week in which American political endurance is being quietly consumed. They are not racing toward a military victory. They are running out the clock on American patience. History suggests this is not an unreasonable bet. Announcement number 3. The diplomatic architecture has already collapsed, and almost nobody noticed. Pakistan was brought in as a mediating force because both sides needed a credible third party. What appears to have happened, based on reporting from multiple outlets, is that the mediation encountered a problem that no amount of diplomatic skill can fully solve. The problem is that the American negotiating position cannot be reliably transmitted because it changes, sometimes within the same news cycle, depending on whether the president is speaking to a reporter, posting on Truth Social, or sending direct messages that occasionally end up published publicly by accident. We know, as a documented matter of record, that Trump's private communications are stylistically indistinguishable from his public ones. All caps, emotionally volatile, internally contradictory. The accidentally published message intended for Pam Bondi was not an aberration. It was a window. Now imagine you are a Pakistani diplomat. Your entire function is to take the American position and convey it accurately to Tehran, but the American position is a moving target that sometimes contradicts itself within hours. You are not mediating between two stable negotiating frameworks. You are trying to translate chaos into something a sovereign government can respond to. Iran watched the ceasefire moment unfold in real time. Watch the conciliatory Truth Social post appear, then watch the next 7 hours of escalating maximalist rhetoric detonate whatever diplomatic scaffolding had been quietly constructed. Their conclusion, not unreasonably, is that the problem is not the mediator. The problem is that there may be no coherent American position to mediate toward. And that conclusion, more than any military calculation, is what makes the path to a negotiated exit extraordinarily difficult to map from where we currently stand. Now I want to show you something that rarely makes it into the headline coverage, because anyone can read a press release. Anyone can watch a clip and react to what was said on the surface. What separates genuine analysis from commentary is the ability to read what is happening underneath. In the conversations that do not get broadcast, in the documents that surface briefly before being walked back, in the moments where the architecture of official confidence briefly shows its cracks. Here is what those cracks are currently revealing. The Financial Times reported that following the collapse of the Pakistan talks, J.D. Vance communicated to people in his circle that the blockade strategy would bring Iran back to the negotiating table, quote, in no time. Read that slowly. The second most powerful person in the United States government, the person who is one heartbeat away from the presidency, reportedly assessed that a nation which has survived decades of coordinated international sanctions would capitulate to an extended naval blockade within a matter of weeks. There are two possible explanations for that assessment. Either it was a deliberate oversimplification designed to maintain internal morale and political momentum, or it was genuine. And if it was genuine, then we are looking at a strategic miscalculation of a magnitude that should concern every serious observer of this conflict, regardless of their political orientation. Then there is the Hegseth paradox, and this one is worth sitting with. Pete Hegseth built a significant portion of his public identity on the argument that the Bush administration lied the American people into the Iraq War. That officials stood behind government podiums and constructed a misleading picture of reality to justify a military decision that had already been made. He was compelling making that argument. He was specific. He was passionate. He is now standing behind a government podium and explaining that the Strait of Hormuz blockade will not meaningfully affect the American economy because the United States sources much of its energy domestically, which is technically selective enough to be functionally misleading in exactly the way he once condemned. A reporter from TMZ, not the Washington Post, not the New York Times, not any outlet with a permanent White House credential, walked into the Pentagon briefing room and asked the question that the entire credentialed press corps had declined to ask. What does it feel like in your body, in your mind, when you give the order to bomb people? Hegseth dismissed it as a very TMZ question, but here's the reality, that was the most important question asked in that room all week. The fact that it required a celebrity gossip outlet to ask it tells you everything you need to know about the current state of institutional accountability in American war journalism. The insiders know what is happening. The question is whether the public connects the dots before the consequences become irreversible. I do not deal in speculation for its own sake. Every scenario I am about to walk you through is grounded in the strategic logic, the economic data, and the negotiating dynamics we have already established. 3 paths forward, only one of them ends without lasting systemic damage. Scenario 1, the Vietnam trap. This is, based on current trajectory, the highest probability outcome. The conflict does not end. It does not dramatically escalate into something that forces an immediate resolution. It simply continues, week after week. The blockade remains partially effective, but not decisive. Iran absorbs the economic pressure at a cost that is painful but survivable. American naval assets remain committed to an operation that is expensive, logistically grinding, and producing diminishing political returns. Meanwhile, the global economic damage accumulates silently, not in a single catastrophic event that mobilizes political will on all sides, but in the slow, unglamorous way that systemic stress actually operates. Airlines restructuring routes, emerging market central banks burning through foreign exchange reserves, supply chain managers making conservative decisions that collectively subtract percentage points from global growth projections quarter after quarter. At some point, and history suggests this point arrives faster than governments expect, the domestic political cost inside the United States becomes unsustainable. Approval ratings erode. Congressional pressure builds. The language around the conflict quietly shifts from victory to stability to responsible disengagement. And America finds an exit that cannot honestly be called a win. The people who pay the highest price in this scenario are not the decision makers in Washington or Tehran. They are middle-income households in import-dependent economies who never had a vote in any of this. Scenario 2, the ugly deal. Both sides absorb enough damage over a compressed timeline that a negotiated exit becomes mutually preferable to continued attrition. A third party, potentially not Pakistan, given how severely that channel has been compromised, facilitates a framework that gives both governments enough surface-level language to declare something resembling success to their domestic audiences. Trump announces a historic agreement. Iran retains the core elements of its nuclear infrastructure that it was never, under any realistic reading of the situation, going to fully dismantle. Some sanctions are lifted. The blockade ends. Oil markets stabilize within days. The underlying tensions that produce this conflict remain entirely unresolved. The foundational disagreements about regional influence, about nuclear thresholds, about the long-term strategic posture of both nations in the Middle East, none of that gets addressed in a deal that both sides need primarily as an escape ramp. This scenario produces the least immediate damage. It is also arguably the least honest resolution. And deals built on mutually convenient fiction have a documented historical tendency to regenerate the conflicts they were designed to conclude. Scenario 3, the black swan, low probability, catastrophic consequences if realized, a single uncontrolled escalation event, a naval incident, a miscalculated strike, a missile that lands somewhere it was not supposed to land, producing casualties at a scale that makes de-escalation politically impossible for either government. The strait closes completely, not partially, not functionally, completely. Brent crude does not spike to $130. It goes somewhere that quantitative models have not seriously stress tested because the assumption of a full Hormuz closure was treated as too extreme to model rigorously. Watch for the early warning signals. Brent crude sustained above $120 per barrel. Credit default swap spreads on major European financial institutions widening sharply and rapidly. Anomalous volume in gold futures and Swiss franc positions. When institutional money moves into those specific instruments simultaneously, it means the people with the most sophisticated risk models have stopped treating this scenario as theoretical. That is your early warning system. The one nobody on financial television is currently telling you to watch. Come back with me to 6:17 a.m. in Washington, D.C. A reporter asks a simple question about time. 3 words come back. And now, having walked through the full architecture of what those three words actually set in motion, the failed assumptions, the hidden economic mechanisms, the asymmetric warfare being waged through calendars and choke points, the diplomatic infrastructure that dissolved in real time, you understand something that the headline coverage is not yet equipped to tell you. Those three words were not bravado. They were a confession that the exit strategy does not exist, that the 4-day promise, the 4 to 6 week window, the quiet assurances given to allies that this would be contained and concluded, none of it was built on a foundation that could bear the weight of contact with reality. And so we arrive at the principle that I want to leave you with, because it is old. It predates every conflict we discuss today. It will outlast whatever resolution eventually emerges from this one. In any negotiation, at any table, in any era, regardless of the military hardware on either side, the party that needs the outcome less holds the structural advantage. Not the party with the larger navy, not the party with the more advanced weapon systems, the party with the greater capacity to absorb cost, to endure time, to outlast the other side's political will. Iran has been sanctioned, isolated, and economically pressured for decades. They have already paid most of the price that external coercion can extract from a sovereign nation. Their baseline is a condition that would be considered crisis level anywhere in the Western political context, and they have normalized it. America is 6 weeks into a conflict that was supposed to last 4 days. The economic consequences are beginning to register in airline schedules and central bank reserves and consumer prices. The political clock is running. And the person standing at the podium saying, "Don't rush me," is, whether he understands it or not, describing a race he did not design a strategy to win. That is the picture the mainstream coverage is not assembling for you. Now I want to hear from you. Which scenario do you believe is most likely? The Vietnam trap, the ugly deal, or the black swan? And more specifically, what do you think will be the first visible signal that the situation is breaking decisively in one direction? Put your analysis in the comments. The most interesting responses are the ones that identify something the rest of us have not considered yet. And if you want to keep reading this board as it develops, you know what to do.